Today, we're going to do a full rundown on this 1992 Suzuki GSX-R 750 oil-cooled track bike. But before we get started, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody that tunes in and watches our videos. It's truly an honor. I really appreciate it. If you can subscribe, that would be extremely helpful. It doesn't cost you anything and it just lets the videos show up in your feed and it helps us a bunch on our end with analytics, etc. With that said, let's get into it. This is my new track bike, hopefully race bike in the near future. So we're going to go through like piece by piece of this whole motorcycle front to back and kind of share some of the parts that we've put on it and how we built it. So I've had a real fascination with GSX-R 750s. I'm not exactly sure where it comes from. I do remember as a kid watching Jamie Whittam race one of these in British Superbike, so I do have some early memories of that. And I did race GSX-R 600s for a little while, like 06, 07 model bikes. So I've always kind of had an affiliation to Suzuki. I don't exactly know why. Maybe, I kind of feel like they're maybe a little bit of the underdog of the Japanese manufacturers, but they were very successful as well, so that's really cool. So last year I became really fascinated with these oil-cooled GSX-Rs, and the goal was to find a motorcycle and race it in ARMA someday, because ARMA has those next-gen classes, so these bikes would be qualified for ARMA Next Gen 1. So I kind of went down a path and I found a 89 bike that was really rough here in Idaho, and I bought that chassis and ended up selling the engine and then kept kind of going back and forth. And then at one time I talked to a gentleman named Tony in the Midwest, and he had a ex-Resra Suzuki oil-cooled bike, and I was really considered buying that bike. I really wanted the bike. And then I went to Barber to Vintage Festival, and I kind of saw the level at which some of these bikes were being raced at, which was higher than I would be able to do in the near future. So with a Vesra bike, like that bike had a lot of history and heritage, and Mark raced it in Mid-Ohio and then raced it back in the day. And I feel like with a motorcycle of that caliber, there's a certain expectation to be able to ride it quickly. And I just didn't feel like I was there as a rider. So I passed on the Vesra bike, which was quite tough because is a very, very special motorcycle, and I know that the opportunities to own a bike like that again in the future will be almost impossible. However, passed on that, and I went to Barber, and I was like really excited about these bikes. I went to the swap meet and walked every aisle, and I was like just scouring. I'm like, there's got to be a guy here with GSX-Rs and a whole table full of stuff, and it just didn't happen. And I kind of came home a little bit deflated, to be honest, because I'm like, man, that's the biggest vintage motorcycle festival in the US, and there's nobody has GSX-R parts and no bikes for sale, etc. So I came back from Barber, and I had a Facebook Marketplace ad saying I was looking for oil-cooled GSX-Rs. Well, this guy Marshall in Idaho Falls like sends me a message, and then we get on a call, and he's basically like, hey, have you had any luck finding these bikes? And I'm like, no, I'm kind of bummed. And he's like, huh, interesting. He's like, well, I have like a storage unit full of them. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, I've got like a few of them. So kind of talked to Marshall and saw some bikes. But at first he was like pretty hesitant to sell me anything. And then we kind of became friends and worked out a few things, and then he ended up selling me a bike, which was this one. At that time it was just a green street bike. It still had all turn signals, lights, etc. And it was pretty rough overall. It had good bones and had all the parts, but it needed some work for sure. A few things I was really excited about is it did have a Yoshimura duplex exhaust, and it did have a Fox twin clicker rear shock on it. And then basically, as far as I can remember, the rest of the bike was relatively stock. So over the last 12 months, kind of gone to work on this motorcycle, rebuilding it. I will say the motor has never come out of this chassis, and so far the engine seems to be good. However, basically the whole rest of the bike came apart. I took the approach of starting from the outside and working in, which I don't know if that was a great strategy or not, but it did keep the bike somewhat complete through the whole process. So one thing that was great with the bike, I was able to purchase a bunch of parts also from Marshall, which included these powder coated wheels. So we started on the outside and started working our way to the middle. So started with the wheels and then worked on the brakes. So got all new EBC brake discs, front and rear. Kept the stock front Nissan twin pot calipers. I did rebuild those calipers and then put fresh pads in, G-brakes, stainless steel brake lines, and then finished them off with a really cool Gale Speed master cylinder. On the rear, it was a similar type program. G-brakes, stainless steel brake line, new brake pads, and then put in a pretty cool rear brake reservoir delete kit that I got the parts from Sport Bike Track Gear, I believe. So basically just a rubber hose with a cap on it, a couple of clamps, but it kind of cleaned up all the rear brake. From there, the bike did have Yoshimura rear sets on it, which were super cool. One of the pegs was broken, so my brother, he has a little machine shop, Tech 7 Fabrication, and he machined me some new foot pegs for these Yosh rear sets, and we kind of cleaned those up a little bit, which was really cool. One of the big things with this bike is I didn't want to go super crazy with modifications. What I mean by that is I wanted to keep the modifications relatively period correct. So, and no disrespect to anybody, everybody build their bike however you want, but there are a lot of these motorcycles out there that have like newer GSX-R front ends on them with radial brakes, etc., and different wheels and swing arms and stuff. And I no doubt this performance is really cool, but just from like a heritage standpoint, I kind of wanted to keep the bike like period correct as much as possible. So my goal was like to model it off of like the Works endurance bikes of that era, where they maybe had slightly better forks than the model came with and braced frames, etc. But it wasn't a 2015 front end on a 1992 motorcycle. So the one thing that was really nice about this bike is that being the M model and the last generation of the oil cooled bikes, this bike is about as developed as it got. Probably is arguably the best oil cooled GSX-R. I believe it was slightly heavier than the model that preceded. However, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of that was due to the big headlight, because that thing weighed quite a bit. It had the big endurance style enclosed headlight. But this bike has the upside down forks, it had a more aerodynamic bodywork, obviously 17-inch wheels, the long stroke engine, so pretty good, probably the best oil cooled bike. If you don't agree with that, tell me in the comments. I'm sure somebody will have something to say about a bold statement like that. Anyway, yeah, kept working on the bike and we just kind of worked our way in. I had the forks redone, so Andy Youngstrom, local to Idaho Falls, he rebuilt the forks. The Fox shock on the back, really cool piece, and my friends at Fox were able to rebuild that. And another cool thing that happened is I hit up a gentleman named Jeff Favorite, who was the race tuner for Fox during the era which these bikes were raced. So he worked with Doug Chandler and the Team Hammer bikes, etc. So I hit up Jeff on Facebook and I was like, hey, like, can you give me any specs for this? I don't know if you would remember anything. And he just rattled off like spring rates and valving stacks, which I'm like, dude, this was like 30 years ago. How do you remember all this? And he's like, I worked on a lot of those bikes. I kind of remember. And the reason I was sensitive to knowing the information is that this bike, I put on an ACC billet SRS linkage. From what I understand is the stock linkage on this bike was basically built so the bike could have a passenger on it, which is not the best rear suspension ratio, etc., that you would need if you were to race it or take it on the track with a single passenger. So Fox at that time, they built what was known as an SRS link that changed the rear suspension ratio, and ACC Billet in South Africa, they build like a replica of that part. So I put that on it, which Jeff told me, like, if you're doing the SRS link, you got to change the spring rate significantly. So I don't remember the spring rate exactly off the top of my head. If you're interested, hit me up and I could give you that information. But the point is I was able to get a spring on this that matched the linkage that I have. And then we also made a little changes to the dampening. So the guys at Fox were awesome getting that redone. So that's a really cool piece. That's kind of one of the things that when I go back to the heritage of the bike, like a lot of guys build these and they put S1000 BMW shocks on them, which I have no doubt are awesome, but it's also not a period correct piece, where I was really fortunate to have this Fox shock and a few of these other pieces to keep the bike relatively period correct. So then moving on, we did the rear swing arm. Devin over at Boondocker was extremely helpful. What we did on the swing arm is we took first gen R1 swing arm, cut the bracing off of the top of the R1 swing arm, and then Devin aluminum welded it onto the factory swing arm. So that was really cool, kind of gives it that works look. Moving on, for carburetors, I messed around with the stock carburetors and I tried rebuilding them, and it was like I'd get one carb to seal and then the next one would leak, and then finally I was just like done with this. And Rodney Mankey was super helpful. He's like, just buy new carbs. So I bit the bullet and ended up buying these Mikuni RS36s. Had to get the new boots. I believe the boots are off of a Bandit 1200. And then we put these on. We had a lot of help from Craig at Pingle Enterprises. And then did velocity stacks, and then new cables, etc. And then while I was at it, put on a Pingle fuel valve, high flow fuel valve. So yeah, I haven't ridden it a whole lot, but so far, the bike seems to work really good. Flat slides are kind of a different thing. You know, you kind of have to roll into them. But as far as peak power goes, the bike seems pretty good. Obviously, I say this a lot in my videos, but I know that performance is relative to other things, and having not ridden a lot of other slingshots, I don't really know for sure, but it does feel pretty good. So pretty happy with that. Moving on to the rest of the bike. ACC Billet Engineering in South Africa, those guys are a great resource. I got the triple clamps from them and the clip-ons, and then they also have a cool upper shock clevis that's adjustable. So I haven't really got to the point of getting everything figured out on this bike, and as you've probably seen from videos in the past, I kind of like to keep stuff relatively stock and before I start messing with it. The challenge with this motorcycle is it has a lot of adjustability in it. So with the linkage and the rear shock clevis, etc., and then the spring rate, there's a lot of different things going on. So that's the goal for the future, is just to try and get this chassis set up, get the suspension set up, and get it handling in a good spot. So my plan for that is I'll reference some of the books on this subject and then try to get that as far as I can. Another option was I might go work with James Compton. He's up in Billings, Montana, and he's an absolute wizard when it comes to ex-AMA crew chief, so absolute wizard when it comes to suspension, and I think he could really help get this bike in a good spot. So that'll be the next priority, is working on the suspension. Other modifications to the bike, body work. So this is the stock tank. I sanded the stock tank down, and then I got the body work from Rocambi Weiss, I believe. So I'm not sure on the exact pronunciation of that, but it's a German / Eastern European company that has a lot of cool fiberglass. So I got the body work from them. It's pretty decent, I would say. I have seen, and I do have a tail unit from Jason at Fiberman in Ireland. I would say his stuff is far and away better than this. However, when I was building this bike, he didn't have the parts for this model bike. He did recently get the Yosh F1 bodywork, and I believe he's going to have molds for that. So it's very likely that this bodywork will go away and be replaced with Fiberman bodywork in the future. But for right now, this is what we're running. One of the challenges is that this tail unit, I believe, is for a W model, which is very similar to this, but the W has like a slightly different frame. So mounting the tail unit was a little bit tricky, and I've got a little bit of a gap here. I had to make some modifications to the subframe, or I guess it's not really a subframe because it doesn't come off, but the rear frame. So I had to build some brackets, etc., to get this all to mount up. But I think it looks pretty good for what it is. So then I worked with Dan Riley at Gun Design. He's a designer based in Minneapolis, and he designed delivery for this bike, which I was super pumped with. It's kind of a nod to Yoshimura with the 347 on the side. And I mean, Yoshimura have contributed more to this era of motorcycles and current motorcycles probably than anybody. So it was really fitting to have a Yosh graphic package on this. So Dan came up with the design, and then a gentleman named Steve Quintana in Idaho Falls, he painted the bike, did the white and then the blue and then this blue panel, and then I did the vinyl edge graphics in Idaho Falls, cut out the vinyl, and then I kind of laid it on using the pictures. So that was a fun process. Takes a lot of patience to do that, but pretty happy with how it looks. Then did the pinstriping on the number plates. Put some numbers on here at some point, not really sure. We'll have to see if I can get an ARMA number when we get to that point. Other things on the bike, you know, the Yosh exhaust, I'm really excited about this. This is an original duplex, and my brother put a new sleeve on this exhaust and machined it down, polished it. And then Yosh were really helpful. Dan over at Yosh was able to get me an emblem that worked on this. And then another thing we did is we modified this mid pipe. So this exhaust came out pretty low and kind of just looked funky, whereas like the race endurance bikes of the period, the exhaust came out a bit higher. So I was able to get the mid pipe modified to the point so the exhaust came out at a steeper angle. Makes it look a lot better. I guess probably improves ground clearance a little bit also. And then a snowmobile exhaust company in Idaho Falls, SLP, they ceramic coated the headers and the mid pipe black. So yeah, pretty pumped. It's kind of a cool period correct piece on the bike. From there, you know, there's a few other things. I got a MotoGP Works catch can, which is a nice trick piece, goes in front of the front sprocket. And on sprockets, I worked with Vortex, and we did a 1649 gearing. 49 is probably larger than I would have ideally went with, but we were limited to the front sprocket size. So to get the gearing somewhat in line, we did the bigger rear sprocket. That's another thing that likely in the future that'll change, but this is a good starting point. We'll kind of move on from here. So see how it goes. Other stuff on the bike, Junior and guys at Boondocker helped me build a really cool front fairing stay, which is really neat. And the stock fairing stay on this bike is like really big and heavy because it holds the heavy front headlight. So I got rid of that, built a new fairing stay, and then also moved the gauge off of the triple clamp to the fairing stay. That was one of the things I've learned. Like Kevin Cameron has a really cool podcast on Cycle World, and that was one of the things that he was mentioning is like when bikes started to handle a lot better, one of the things that they did was they started taking things off of the forks. So, which most modern bikes have gauges in the front, not on the triple tree. So Speed Hut built me a really cool gauge. They're a Utah-based company that build these in the US, which is really cool. So pretty pumped on that. At some point in the future, I will change the dash. I'm going to put one of those Yosh Progress oil temperature gauges if I can find one. I'd like to get that up there, and then at that point, I'll make a different dash and kind of clean it up a little bit. So you're probably noticing in this video, there is a number of things that I say I will do in the future. I think a motorcycle like this is probably never going to be finished. The plan is just to get it to a point and start riding it, and then just start developing it from there. You know, I don't want to just like throw the checkbook at it and do all this crazy stuff. And I like to kind of do it more in stages, you know, like, is this front suspension the limiting factor? Okay, if it is, let's fix that. You know, is the engine the limiting factor? Okay, if that's it, let's work on more power, etc. So we're gonna kind of take it in stages. I'm pretty happy with it the way it is for now. Got a few laps on it last weekend, and I've got a lot of stuff I want to do to it over the winter. My hope is that when the snow melts in the spring, we'll be able to get this thing on the track, and it will be closer than it is now. So I think in the future, it's kind of hard to say how this is all going to go. One thing I do see do in the future, we'll put a heat shield on the carbs so that we're not sucking all that hot air, and then likely do some kind of ram air or fresh air tubing coming back to push fresh air into the carbs. Another thing I could see doing in the future is maybe putting an oil cooler, a secondary oil cooler up behind the front fairing, cut out the front fairing so that we can help cool the engine. From what I hear, the biggest challenge on these motorcycles when you start building power and going fast is just keeping them cool. So could see doing that. There's also a small chance there might be a race engine coming for this bike at some point. So a few things to figure out on that subject, but we will make videos on that if that were to happen. So yeah, it's super cool. I'm really excited about the bike. I was very pleasantly surprised on how well it worked at the track for the first time out. It's just a really neat bike. It's got a lot of heritage. It's really different. It's unique. It sounds cool. It's kind of clunky. So it's going to be really fun. I think in the future, I want to just keep making it better and better. I would love to someday be on Arma Grid and race it in next gen. The ultimate goal would be to do enough Arma races to go to Barber and then race at Barber. But you know, we're kind of taking baby steps. We'll hopefully get there someday. But so the plan moving forward for now, as far as race bikes and track bikes go, would be to get the S-Rad built into a track bike. That could be raced in next gen 3. Maybe next gen 2, and this would be a good next gen 1 bike. So we'd have the 2 bikes, the fuel injected, more modern bike, and then this bike is more older heritage carbureted bike. So yeah, it's really cool. I'm excited about it. I think one of the coolest parts of this whole process has been just meeting the people and kind of just figuring out the parts and where to get the parts. Coming into this project, I fully anticipated that the riding experience of this bike would be kind of vintage and old school. What I hadn't anticipated is even just the build process was kind of a nod to years in the past. And what I mean by that is, like, I have modern dirt bikes, and you know, you buy a new dirt bike and then you go on a soulless website and you buy a bunch of parts. Most of them are Asian, Chinese parts, billet stuff, etc. They show up in the mail 2 days later, you put them on the bikes and you go ride it. Building one of these things is not like that at all. It's like you gotta talk to people on forums and Facebook groups and call people and ask people this, and then they're like, oh, you need to call Jason in Ireland, and Jason's a rad guy in Ireland that builds bodywork. And then, oh, you got to get a hold of Donovan in South Africa. He builds the billet stuff. So then get a hold of Donovan. And then, like, it's a lot more of an intimate experience where you're like talking to people. And then obviously on the custom stuff, you're going over to shops and be like, hey, can you build this? You know, when can you build it? How much is it going to cost? So it's just a really cool experience. I think, like, I don't want to get political and talk about today's society, etc., but in a world of Amazons and huge online retailers, it's a different program. You know, you just order something and it just shows up and you're like, oh, sweet. You kind of lose the fact that there's actually real people that are craftsmen that are building cool parts, and you need them to, like, show up to work, and you need them to take a pride in their work to build these things to put on your motorcycle. So that part of it, I think, has been super cool. And there's so many people, I can't even list them all here, that have helped along the process, been super supportive, people in Facebook groups, etc. So thank you to everybody. I think it was just a really cool experience overall. And I think, you know, people talk about social media is bad and social media is bad for kids, and I'm not debating any of that. But I think a motorcycle like this, and to build it, is a testament to social media and how connected the world is. I can't even imagine how it would be to build one of these if you couldn't connect with this person or hear from this person or go on this forum or watch this YouTube video. It's been invaluable in making all this happen. So super cool experience. Again, I really appreciate it. I'm honored by everybody that watches these videos, everybody that comments, reaches out. It's super cool. If you're building one of these and you have questions or need help finding parts, etc., please reach out. I'll be happy to help any way I can, point you in the right direction at least. And if you have one of these that's like rotting away in your storage unit or your grandma's backyard, get it out and get it built. Like, they're really cool. We need more of these bikes built. Let's fill some Arma grids and get them out there or ride them on the street, take them a bike night. It's a really cool piece of motorcycling history, and it just would be awesome if we saw more of these bikes kind of back out there doing things. So it's gonna be cool. This is definitely not gonna be a garage queen. I'm gonna go ride it as much as I possibly can, and yeah, just have a ton of fun with it. So I'm sorry this video is maybe a little bit long, but there's a lot of information and just wanted to share it the best I could. So again, thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you can. Leave us a comment. I'd love to hear about your build, whatever you're doing. Also, there's a lot of people who come on here and they're like, tell me about their bikes and stuff, and I'd love to see it. YouTube as a platform is not really set up for that type of interaction. So if you go onto our Instagram account, if you're on Instagram, and add us on there, it's a much better platform for messaging back and forth, and I can see your motorcycle and you can see what I'm doing, etc. So a little bit more of a community type setup over there. I'm not saying don't leave comments. We love comments, so I appreciate that. But I'd love to see your bikes, so hit us up on Instagram. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next one.